All right, guys, today we're talking about the size principle discovered by Dr. L. Wood Henneman in 1957. Let's get started. You're going to learn about what the size principle is and who discovered it. We're going to talk about what is a motor unit, importance of homogeneity of the muscle fibers in a motor unit, relationships of the size principle, force-velocity relationship, hypertrophy and strength, power and rate of force development, using velocity to improve intent. Strength needs maximum effort. Hypertrophy needs velocity loss. Power and rate of force development need maximum effort and velocity, and we'll learn why. Let's get going. What is the size principle? In 1957, Dr. L. Wood Henneman discovered that motor units are recruited in order from smallest to largest, depending on the intensity of the force being applied. You know, if anyone here that's listening is an exercise science major, undoubtedly you've heard this. Matter of fact, anyone who's taken any science has probably heard about the size principle because it's one of the most basic of principles, but it's often overlooked as how important it really is. So, low threshold motor units are important for eye movement, posture, walking, everyday chores. And normally what a low threshold motor unit is, it is attached to 1 to 20, like a very few amount of muscle fibers. As you can see over here, a motor unit is going to be composed of, the dendrites, the nucleus, the cell body. It's going to have an axon. It's going to have this myelin sheath, and that is important because it's going to make the conduction rate faster. And then these are the axon terminals that are going to be attached to whatever amount of muscle fibers that specific motor unit is, or that alpha motor neuron is connected to. Some are connected to just a few. Like in the eye, it needs very fine specific movement. So you're going to get 1 to 10 maybe. But when it comes to like lifting heavy weights and you need your quadriceps or your hamstrings or glutes, you're talking about muscles with our motor units that are connected to 1 to even up to 1,000 muscle fibers. So, it's important that when we're training, we understand which motor units we're actually recruiting, because it's going to be very specific to how we improve as athletes. So a motor unit, alpha motor neurons consists of the body, the dendrites, and the axon. And the axon is just the cable that carries the electrical impulses, exciting the skeletal muscle fibers. And we've already talked about the myelin sheath. It consists of lipids and protein substances that just acts as like the rubber around the electrical wires you see running down the sides of the roads that helps speed up that electrical impulse. Now, the importance of homogeneity of the muscle fibers in a motor unit. Each motor unit innervates a certain amount of muscle fibers, but they're of similar contraction rates. So they're going to be connected to either slow twitch type 1 or fast twitch type 2B, sometimes 2X, or hybrids of those, but they're all going to be the same in there. So like when you recruit high threshold motor units, more than likely they're going to consist of the very fast twitch, bigger muscle fibers. Low threshold motor units, they're going to innervate, smaller type 1A fibers. It's going to have low force, but highly low force output or capabilities. They're going to be highly oxidative though, and resistance to fatigue due to more mitochondria and an increased amount of myoglobin, which is a molecule that stores it's a molecule for storing and diffusing oxygen within the muscle. So very important, and you need both. And depending on the athlete, you need to know which motor units you're recruiting, because if you're a long distance runner, this is where you're going to want to be. If you're a weightlifter or a sprinter, maybe not so much, because you're going to need the high threshold motor units that are capable of high amounts of force. They're going to be less oxidative, meaning they're going to fatigue more quickly. The high force is required to recruit those threshold motor units though. So like you're going to have to do movements that are going to require high amounts of force. And so, but as you're going to learn in a minute, that high force can be experienced in multiple ways, and it's going to create specific adaptations. So we'll get into that in just a bit, just to kind of give you a foreshadowing. But remember too, the all or none principle, which means if you recruit a certain motor unit, you're going to recruit all of the muscle fibers that particular neuron innervates. So it's not like they're going to just get a few of them. It's all or none.
Yes, sir. There it is.
So relationships of the size muscle. Here's where it gets important for coaches to start listening to me. So whether an athlete performs a 1 repetition back squat or a maximum jump, high threshold motor units are recruited. That's what the part I was talking about earlier. You're going to recruit those, but the key is the effort and the speed of the effort. So the velocity of the stimulus dictates the adaptation more so than effort. Because maximum effort is going to be produced whether you're jumping, like you see Matt with his 41-inch vertical leap here, so, or whether he's doing cleans. We'll fast forward. Whether he's doing a snatch here, same maximum effort. That's a faster contraction. Not as fast as the jump, but faster than, say, a squat. All of those require maximum effort and high threshold motor units. However, the adaptation created by each is going to be different. So the force-velocity relationship, this is important to understand. Maximum force is inversely proportional to the velocity of a contraction, which means if you're the faster the contraction, the less amount of force you're going to be able to produce. So a maximum effort slow velocity movement, MESVM, recruits the maximum amount of high threshold motor units, but also the slow velocity, listen here, up here, this is important, ensures maximum cross bridges between actin and myosin. And so that is where strength and hypertrophy are start to become the adaptation that you're going to induce with very heavy, slow velocity movements. A maximum effort, high velocity movement, like a jump or like a clean, recruits the high threshold motor units, but less of those cross bridges are formed. And so what happens is you get better at producing force at those high velocities, probably by increasing the rate of coding. And so you're going to get better at creating that signal from the spinal cord to the muscle down the alpha motor neuron. But you're not going to get really good at maximizing the cross bridges between actin and myosin. You'll start to be able to recruit those a little bit faster, and you'll increase that amount, but you're not going to maximize it. So it's not going to be as much hypertrophy or as much 1 RM strength. So the max effort, slow velocity movement induces more hypertrophy and absolute strength. The maximum effort, high velocity movement induces more high velocity force production and power due to improvements probably in rate coding and a few other potential adaptations. So here's an example of all three. So I showed you the jump. Here's Ryan doing a snatch. All these are going to be recruiting the maximum amount of high threshold motor units. But like Sarah's, where it's a bit slower because it's super heavy, is going to also ensure that the maximum amount of cross bridges between actin and myosin are occurring. So she will get stronger, especially at the absolute strength quality of strength, and she's going to induce more hypertrophy. All right, now hypertrophy and strength. Maximum hypertrophy and maximum force production of skeletal muscle requires the maximum effort recruiting the high threshold motor units. That's always required, which can be defined as the maximum positive velocity at any given load. So, if you're doing 100 pounds, if you're doing the maximum effort with 100 pounds, or you're doing 500 pounds, and you're also doing the maximum effort possible, you will recruit those high threshold motor units. A slow velocity, however, enables a maximum number of cross bridges, like I was telling you. So experiencing near failure in a given set of repetitions, maximizing the efforts, is going to maximize hypertrophy and strength. A difference though, hypertrophy can be maximized with light to moderate loads as long as the athlete performs enough reps to reach near failure. So if you do, say, 40% of your 1RM, you can maximize hypertrophy with that as long as you do enough reps to where the velocity is starting to lower because of fatigue, and that will also maximize the high threshold motor units and the cross bridges. They just won't happen at the same time. So probably that's why you don't get as strong. It's just the coordination of the motor unit recruitment. But a muscle's ability to produce maximum force requires higher loads. So to get strong, you're going to have to use higher loads. The power and rate of force of development, which is where I feel, it's like, scientifically, coaches need to really focus more here. You need to focus on it, even more than power, is producing the maximum amount of force at a particular velocity that relates to whatever sport the athlete you're coaching performs. So if you're training to simply be bigger and stronger, you're probably training to be slow as well. Think about like bodybuilders, or like think about even your strongest powerlifter. If they were to try to do a vertical leap, or they tried to do a clean, they're not going to be very good because they're not going to be able to produce that high rate of force. So a maximum effort recruiting high threshold motor units, just like for hypertrophy and strength, is required. It's requirement that movements be performed at maximum velocities. Movements performed at higher velocities requiring moderate to light loads, and a look at. You also want to consider a look at the amortization phases of movements and ground contact times within bounding exercises. So, looking at how quickly one can turn around, say a squat. Looking at how quickly that eccentric contraction turns around into the concentric contraction is important, because the speed of which someone can do that is going to elicit a greater stretch reflex, which leads to higher amounts of force being produced at higher rates. So a maximum back squat is performed at around 0.3 meters per second, but a vertical leap is happening at 2.7 meters per second, and sprinting is even faster. So spending a lot of time at 0.3 or less or slower is probably not going to lead to your ability to produce force quick enough to get better at jumping or sprinting. Now we're going to talk about, so what do you do? How do you ensure that you're performing a lift in a particular manner that's going to elicit the response you're after? So you're going to be either measuring or guessing. You've heard me say that. If you follow me at all, it's so important. So if someone's just lifting and you hear the words, well, that looks faster, or I think they're getting better, or a certain athlete I believe is getting better. Those are such subjective phrases that I can't stand. It's like, as an exercise scientist, I want to know if someone is getting better and exactly what does that mean. So whether you want maximum strength, maximum hypertrophy, or maximum rate of force development, you need to monitor to ensure the intended adaptations are taking place. Strength needs maximum effort, of course. It also needs strength is the measurement of force production at a given rate. So let's clear that up. So getting strong doesn't necessarily mean, getting better at bench pressing your 1RM. It means I'm getting better at lifting a greater load at whatever particular rate that I deem to be important. So know that. So Bosco and Dr. Brian Mann have defined, several qualities of strength. Bosco started it. Dr. Brian Mann, I think, took it a little bit further. So as you can see over here, we have the absolute strength, accelerated strength, strength speed strength, and starting strength. And with each of these qualities of strength is there are going to be specific adaptations taking place. So it's important to know where you need to be. If you want to maximize absolute strength, the velocity of contraction has got to be below 0.5 meters per second. And it's going to be 80% or higher of your 1RM. If you want like a maximum bench press, then you have loads even lower, so as close to 0.18 as possible, because that is where the greatest powerlifters in the world, that's the velocity that those 1RM bench presses are occurring. So you need to know. Over here is some specific estimated velocity zones for squats, benches, strict presses, and barbell bent over rows. And these are based on my athletes. And so if you want to test your own, but this at least gives you an idea where to start. So force velocity profiles are I believe, should be required to ensure athletes are performing loads at intended velocities, because each athlete is different. If you only go by what I have over here and you have a bunch of 7-foot athletes, this is not going to be right, because their velocities are going to be higher, because they're going to need to produce force for a longer time, and we already know impulse, which equals force times the duration of which you're applying the force, and it's going to be directly related to an increase in velocity. The longer I have to produce force equals a higher velocity. So, if you have a bunch of, average of 5'7" athletes that are super high twitch, fast twitch, then maybe this will work. But if not, you might want to do your own force velocity profiles. But if an athlete isn't lifting a load at or around normal velocities, one of two things is happening. They're either not producing or not using the amount of effort they normally use, which means they're sloughing off, I would call it, or they're too fatigued. Either way, it needs to be addressed. If they're too fatigued, send them to the house and let's get recovered. If they're not lifting with an intent that is up to their normal amount of effort, well, it's time to get in their grill, I think, or at least find your own ways of motivating your athletes. Using velocity to improve intent. Here's continued now. Hypertrophy needs maximum effort and velocity loss. So an athlete must perform each rep with maximum effort and at a maximum velocity. However, velocity loss must take place. Somewhere around 40 to 50% is where you're going to maximize hypertrophy. So, and that's talking about the first rep as it relates to the final rep. There's going to be about a 40 to 50% velocity loss with typical, loads that people use for hypertrophy. So each repetition needs to be performed at a maximum velocity, and the velocity between the first and final rep will be between 40 to 50% slower and nearing the maximum velocity a particular exercise can be performed. So you're gonna start to hit that minimum velocity threshold. As close to that as possible, because here's what I'm saying. If you're doing 70%, on a bench press, then that final bench press is going to be, somewhere in the 0.2s, at least 0.3s, so you can ensure that maximum hypertrophy is taking place. So power and rate of force development, they need maximum effort and velocity. So maximum velocity, that is. The rate at which an athlete can develop force requires specific work being performed at a particular velocity. So if you're a weightlifter, you have to produce insane amounts of force at incredibly high velocities. That's why, guys, it baffles me when I see high-level weightlifters trying to improve his or her one repetition max in the squat, for example, versus improving their maximum loads at 0.5 or faster. So I'll see a lot of, coaches and athletes, they're trying to peak their 1RM squats and their 1RM snatches and clean and jerks at the same time. And those are two totally different stimuli producing two totally different set of adaptations. So if the goal is snatching and clean and jerking, I recommend really getting good at producing as much force as possible at incredibly high velocities, which mimics snatch and clean and jerk.
Tight, stay tight, keep it vertical.
Also, power and rate of force development.
Into the bar. Yeah.
This is continued. When it comes to the rate of force development, we measure the following parameters. We look at increasing the eccentric velocities of any particular movement or decreasing the time of of the eccentric contraction. We look at improving the loads at particular velocities in a movement. So, if you deem, 0.7 meters per second as important, or even 0.1, then you might want to measure the amount of load you can use at that particular velocity. So ground contact times and the heights for the depth jump is really important to us. And that gives me a really good idea if someone's getting better at their ability to produce force at a very high rate, and if their elasticity is improving, which helps with passive force production, which is great because it's way less fatiguing, and nothing creates faster rates of force than those passive amounts of force that you're going to get through the stretch reflex, improved connective tissue, stronger tighten molecules, which is the protein molecule that you're going to find that helps your actin and myosin stay in place. They resist stretch and they resist the movement of those two, so they stay in place and they cause that shortening of a muscle. So I hope I didn't just crush the definition of tighten, but I did my best. Increasing eccentric velocity. If an athlete can move a particular load at a higher velocity during the eccentric contraction, that shows an improved ability to decelerate coming from improved elasticity, strengthen connective tissues, and strengthen proteins, especially tighten, that resist stretch and lead to increased passive force. Higher velocity eccentric contractions are linked to greater hypertrophy of fast twitch fibers. That's directly from a bit of research by my own professor, Dr. Alex Cook. So I have that bit of research will be at the end when I give my references. So we have looked way too much at concentric velocities, not nearly enough at eccentric velocities, and that's something I believe, and that is something I aim to rectify, along with my colleagues at GymAware. So now, use velocity to improve continued improving loads at particular velocity. Instead of getting caught up in the one-arm race, I recommend, defining the important velocities of an individual athlete and focus on measuring improvements of force at those velocities. For example, my weightlifting athletes perform the majority of their squats somewhere between 0.5 and 0.6 meters per second or faster, even though most 1RM back squats are going to be between 0.16 and 0.3 meters per second. I just don't want to get there because the adaptations required that allows an athlete to move that slowly and at that slow of a grind are not the adaptations I need to move at a high rate. So we have found solid relationships between 1RMs at 0.5 or faster, and it shows the readiness from tapers. So you'll see us measuring a squat at 0.5 meters per second, a front squat normally, the week of a big meet. So with Ryan, I think in the videos, if you go to Mathlete Performance Instagram, you'll see that's exactly what we did in this past competition where he won gold in Cuba. So methods along with velocity to improve rate of force development. So we use GymAware RS and flex units to measure all of our movements. There are a few other movements that might aid in the quest of force reduction at high velocities. Here they are. We use bands, especially with VBT, to increase eccentric velocity from the pulling of the bands. Also allows an athlete to push the concentric contraction as quickly as they can without worrying about the weight flying off their shoulders. So because it's anchored down. Weight releasers are great. This allows us to overload the eccentric contraction as well and creating more elasticity. And we have required higher overall velocities when we use the weight releasers, I'm assuming from the post-activation potentiation. We use depth jumps a lot. Allows athletes to strengthen all those physiological components that occur from the force absorption, like strengthening connective tissue and tighten protein filaments. It's a great way to measure the stretch reflex in a very specific manner. And the flywheel, of course, I've talked a bunch about flywheel, about as much as I talk about velocity, but I can't overstate the importance of using flywheel properly and measuring those contractions, especially with linear velocity. So more to come on that in the near future. In conclusion, Dr. Henneman discovered the size principle, which states that motor units are recruited in order from smallest to largest depending on the intensity of the force being applied. The principle is important in regards to strength, hypertrophy, and rate of force development. Maximum recruitment of high threshold motor units is necessary for any of those three, yet maximum strength requires maximum effort, maximum velocity for a particular load and exercise, and very high loads for improved absolute strength. Maximum hypertrophy requires maximum effort, maximum velocity for a particular load, and velocity loss of somewhere between 40 to 50% to maximize hypertrophy. Let me state, you can go onto GymAware.com and read my article all about hypertrophy, and you see you can get hypertrophy with velocity loss at 20%. It just won't be maximized, but the hypertrophy that will occur will be more to the faster twitch fibers than say when you go to 40 to 50%. So and regardless of the initial load. And final velocity needs to be somewhere near that an exercise's minimum velocity threshold. I should have said whatever an athlete, the slowest velocity movement can be performed. So maximum improvements in the rate of force development require maximum effort, maximum velocity for a particular load, and a substantial amount of time and volume spent at a particular velocity zone, whatever you deem important. So it can all be measured with VBT, especially with GymAware RFs and flex units, which is all I use. And you can't accidentally, hear me when I say this, you can't accidentally help someone achieve greatness. You have to know the details, and you have to measure those details. You can get someone better, and you can improve their athletic ability with a minimum amount of knowledge. Just lift and get them in the weight room, and you're going to get all kinds of adaptations, especially to newbies. But if you want to get somebody to be the next Michael Jordan, or you want to get someone to the Olympics, or you want to get someone to chase down Usain Bolt and be the fastest guy ever, you better understand the details. So as always, email me, travis@gymaware.com, with any questions or any suggestions of things you would like me to do more of these articles or videos on, and read more about the adaptations based on the velocity of a repetition, also at gymaware.com. Here are my references. This last one is the one I was talking about when it comes to Dr. Cook, so Alexander Cook. But anyway, check those out, and I will see you next time.